Welcome everybody to Constellations Conversations with me, Robert Rowland Smith, and Nicola Dunn. Hello, Nicola.
Hi, Robert.
We have just agreed to talk about the topic of money, which in Constellations, of course, crops up quite a lot. I mean, it's one of the more common themes, I think, that we encounter in workshops, along with relationships per se. But we're going to try and do our best to have a go at what money is in Constellations terms. And I do remember, maybe as a way into this, you and I once taught a course on money for Constellations students. And I remember a brilliant phrase you came up with that I still have in mind, which is that money is a wrapper for things. So money is rarely just money. It usually is a signifier of something else, or in fact, sometimes the opposite of a signifier, a concealer of other things that are going on. So for some people, money is a symbol of their own success. Look at all this money I've made. Look how hard I've worked. For other people, what money means is, look, my parents can now be proud of me. Or money means, look, I overcame my adverse, humble beginnings. Or it can be security. Look, I've got all this money and now I'm secure. And maybe as an extension of that, now I've got all this money, I'm no longer terrified of the world because I feel defended. So money is a defense. So it probably works in different ways for different people. But if money is a wrapper, it often has that sort of psychological element that it stands for something. And actually, it reminds me, I gave a talk on the philosophy of money to people in an investment bank last year. And I was talking about this idea that money means different things to different people. And of course, in its very origins, money is, to use the word, fungible. In other words, it doesn't have any quality in itself, but it enables exchange. So we invent money so that instead of me having to barter my goats for your pig, I can get money from you instead of your pig, and then decide to go and buy, something different with that altogether, half a horse, for example. So money is fungible both economically in that it enables trade, but also psychologically in that it can kind of almost mean anything to anybody. So that's one way into the conversation, Nicola. What are you thinking already?
Yes. So I'm thinking that as we're agreeing, money of itself is neutral, but the family or social and cultural exchange of it is not. So just to add the other side in, so people who have grown up where their family has had very little money often feel very impacted by that. They feel somehow that they have been socially and culturally kept outside the major realm of exchange.
Yeah.
That can be incredibly scorching.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, and continues to be, if money is something that they have struggled with their whole life. And at the same time, we do find people who come from well-resourced families somehow not being able to manage money or manage the exchange of it in a way that sustains them or is fair and equitable and satisfying. So that's also interesting.
Yeah. It is, and I go a little bit further than that because I remember running a constellation for a man, say 4 years ago, who had inherited enough money not to need ever to work in life. And that had produced two feelings in him, which he had never really sort of come to terms with. One was a sense of purposelessness, really, because he'd sort of dabbled in things, but never had to really pursue anything to make money. And secondly, a sense of guilt, because of course, nearly everybody else he ever met complained about not having enough money, and he had too much, effectively. So I'm not asking listeners to start playing their tiny violins or anything. I'm sure there won't be much pity necessarily available for people in that position, but it's there are people like that too for whom that exists, and he's not the only example I've met.
Yes. So I would say, I mean, classically we understand, lottery winners actually sometimes find money very destabilizing. It's seen as this incredible opportunity, but it does change the balance and exchange in all their relationships, both within family and culturally. We see it with, just for an example, professional football players whose families may or may not have had a lot of money, and then suddenly they are the one sibling or child or uncle or nephew or whatever who does have money, and it changes relationships. System feels the weight of a huge amount of money pouring into one end of it almost. And so I agree with you that it sometimes is presented as something hugely desirable, but it has an impact and it creates something that needs to be rebalanced in a system.
I like what you say there, the notion of the rebalancing, and you used the word exchange earlier, which I just want to pick up a little bit on, because obviously money provides opportunities for exchange in that trading sense I suggested earlier. And exchange is a word we revert to a fair amount in constellations, because one of the supposed orders in constellation is that of exchange, where we're seeking balance, to use that word again, pretty much in all our relationships. Now, it doesn't have to be a 50-50 balance, and we should say that straight away. It's a bit more subtle than that. But nevertheless, balance is the case and exchange is the case. And exchange is important as a concept, I think, in constellations, not just as a check to see how much fairness or parity there is in relationships, but to check that there is actual exchange and relationship itself, because when we're in relation with other people, we do exchange with one another. And one of the issues with having a lot of money is that exchange just becomes purely transactional and not relational at all. It's just, I've got this big pile of money, I can pay for these goods and services, and I don't need to get involved. In a way, it allows me the opportunity to stand outside or above the economy, the kind of that social place, the marketplace, where everybody else is kind of involved. And there is something bonding for most people. I mean, we're middle class, pretty obviously, Nicola. We're not dirt poor or anything like that. We're not fabulously rich either, but we live in the world where we need to work, and that brings us into relation with other people professionally in particular, whereby we then have to manage our relationships, be professional, manage ourselves, and so on. So money is about exchange in an important sense of placing the burden of socializing upon us and recognizing that we are indeed in a system. So money is systemic in a quite profound sense. It forces us to exchange with other people and be in relation with other people. And of course, Constellations teaches us exactly that we're never not involved in the system in some way. We can be involved in more or less healthy ways, but we're always in a system. And money, in a way, becomes a reminder of just how systemic our lives are and how economic, with a small e, our lives are all the time, insofar as we're managing exchange, relationship, and balancing.
And you've brought to mind for me, Robert, this idea around, I'm sure come across it in constellations as much as I have, that where there is, these large surpluses of money that have come to someone, and if we were to think about them perhaps in terms of intergenerational money or inherited money, that if money is a wrapper, it's possible to kind of stamp different messages or patterns on that wrapper. And one of them is the circumstances of exchange in which that money was acquired and the fairness of that exchange. So sometimes vast amounts of money are amassed at the expense of quite grueling work conditions for people who, a portion of whom may have had accidents, lost their lives or whatever because they were down diamond mines or whatever they were doing. And so there is a kind of inherent memory somehow in how the money was acquired, because it's about an exchange. And I think, apart from being perhaps very kindly-hearted people, billionaires are often philanthropists. And I think that is a necessary action if you have a lot of money.
Mm.
That somehow rebalancing with the idea of some kind of social good is hugely important. If you've, not that you or I are finding ourselves in that situation, but if anyone listening is, in a way, then something is resettled in the exchange.
Well, I think this is where we touch on the notion of conscience in some way, because and we're talking about an extreme end at the moment, but I think there are ways in which it can be adapted for people who have less money. But at that extreme end of wealth, people who give money away philanthropically do so largely as a matter of conscience. And that reminds us that in Constellations, conscience serves as a measure of how far we belong in a system. Mm-hmm. So the motive, and I don't say this accusingly, but the motive in giving money away is to remain accepted within a system, because the less one gives away, the wealthier one gets, the more one's belonging is actually jeopardized or questioned in some way. So the giving away of money, the philanthropic gift, is also a way that the conscience finds of securing belonging. I can still belong in this group by giving a portion of my wealth away.
Yes. And, we probably don't have too much to say systemically to people who are really, really poor and struggling in their circumstances, because we understand that that's a social situation. They're probably managing their money incredibly well because they have so little of it, they have to. But we may have something to say to those in the middle bracket and the people within that middle bracket who say, my friend who earns the same amount of money and has the same circumstances as me seems able to save money, and it just goes straight through my fingers.
Mm.
So the kind of losing of money is often an interesting feature in our constellation work, or being unable to collect it in order to exchange it.
Mm. And it becomes all the more acute, actually, not just when comparing two friends, but when comparing two siblings. We were chatting a little bit about this before we started recording. And it's sometimes the case, isn't it? It's that there's the wealthy sibling and the poor sibling, even though they've shared very similar upbringings. And the question there, and I think this is where we get into conscience again and loyalty, the degree to which the poorer sibling has, as it were, unconsciously inhibited their own chances of earning money out of a loyalty to somebody else in the system, usually from a previous generation, a parent or grandparent, who's not been wealthy, and therefore earning more money than them seems a mark of betrayal or disloyalty in some way. I can't earn more than my mum or dad, because if I do that, do I still belong to them? So it can often be the case that one sibling carries that systemic conscience as a self-limiting kind of instruction almost in some way, whereas another sibling might not carry it precisely because one sibling has. It's as if the conscience is held in one part of the system but not in another.
Yes. And it could be that a ancestor struggled because of life circumstances to have enough resources, or it could be that they had money and events happened which they participated in, they lost money, but there's definitely a stream of resonance often that one sibling is in contact with, and is often very misunderstood by other family members or other siblings. It's seen as a personal deficit as opposed to carrying something for the system.
Mm. Yes, that's right. And for the one who is holding it, I mean, the money, in a sense, I mean, you talked about those people, and they do come to workshops very often, people who can't hang on to money. the question in a sense is, what is it about that money that makes you need to give it away? And often the underlying question, or the underlying answer rather, is, well, it wasn't mine in the first place, and that's why I'm giving it away. I never owned it, so I'm not losing it in some way because I never properly accepted it. And one of the moves I sometimes do in a constellation, maybe you do this too, is to work on the capacity to receive of the individual. What is it that you need in order to accept this money as yours? Accept not just money, actually, this applies to other things, to gifts, love as well. What is it in you that has become impervious to money, or so that it just sort of slips away like water off a duck's back? And it's often because it's not seen as yours. It's seen as someone else's, seen as a foreign object, and therefore actually kind of needs to be dispensed with. And there's a kind of relief which goes with getting rid of it.
Yes. So, and once again, that's taking us back to exactly what you started with the fact that there isn't an exchange. There hasn't been an exchange.
Yes.
In a fair exchange, in a way. So there, in a sense, then there isn't a place to hold on for whatever period of time for the coming winter for your part of the fair exchange. So it, as you say, it's got rid of in some kind of way.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because exchange just really does bond us to other people in some way. And for those people who keep a lot of money or can't keep any money, in a sense, in both cases, there's a refusal of exchange in very different ways. I'm accumulating lots of money so that I don't have to get caught up with all of these money-related relationships like work and so on. And at the other end, yes, I haven't made the exchange because, it's an aversion in some way, or an avoidance perhaps, of some of the necessary involvement that would be enjoined upon me, if I were in that economy. So it's quite interesting that we have exchange as a kind of form of health, really, when we're exchanging with other people. Exactly. And the lack of exchange is consequently, in a way, a form of ill health. So we need exchange to keep us healthy.
So in a sense, whether you, particularly if you have money, exchanging is good for you rather than just sitting on it or just receiving it. And then I don't know if you find this interesting, but I do. But then when money enters into any kind of couple relationship, some kind of coupling together, that can be very interesting, particularly if the money is inherited from one side, not from the other, or one partner earns more than the other. I think for couples, that is often something which they present as a problematic challenge.
Yes, I mean, maybe we should talk separately about couples per se, but of course, the couple as a phenomenon is uniquely attuned to forms of exchange within it, whether it's money, sex, housework, looking after the kids. The register is kept. The cashing up is done at the end of every day.
Yes. Someone once said to me, which I really liked, they said, yes, there's a register of tasks and there are glamorous jobs, slightly more gritty jobs. And it's normally registered somehow, who's doing what.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, there's discord develops if there's an imbalance in that exchange.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So we come back to the notion of exchange again as a means of keeping us involved. Well, there's obviously a sense of justice that goes with that, but I think it's probably worth making this point quite strongly. In constellations, in systemic work, the point of, in a couple, having a fair exchange around money and other things is not really a point of justice or fairness. I mean, it may be that too, and it would be if you were chatting to your friends about this. My husband never does any housework, for example. That's so unfair. So that may all be true, and I'm not trying to undermine that. But I think what's more important in systemic work is that when there's fair exchange, we're equal with one another. One isn't better than the other. One isn't outside the relationship or looking on from the edge in some way. There's mutual investment, and the mutual investment is a shared risk and a shared sense of bonding that goes with that at the same time. And I think that's the key thing from a systemic point of view. It's not the fairness principle or the justice principle. It's that we've both got skin in the game here, and therefore we're both equally vulnerable, and vulnerable in a shared way, that the risk has been meted out between us. And that's what connects us as much as anything else.
Yes, and probably where relationships get into problems is where there isn't a flow around this.
Yeah.
Become stuck.
Yeah.
And the exchange, as complex as it may be, as you say, it's maybe that one partner, earns 5 times what the other one does, but there are other ways of rebalancing that exchange process.
Mm.
A little bit more politically, but if it's labor and time, that somehow there is some sense of exchange rather than a person refusing to exchange.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I also do quite a lot of organizational constellations, as you know, and I know you do some too occasionally. And it's probably worth just talking about money in relation to businesses as well, just for a few minutes. Because organizations, unlike families, need to make money to keep going. A family doesn't need to make money to be a family. A family is just a family, and in a sense, it just needs to be, or to exchange love with itself. But once we have an organization or a business in the equation, now there is a question of money. Even if it's a public sector organization, it will have been funded in some way, and so on. And so when we then look within an organization, questions of money become all the more acute. And one of the key questions within an organization is, how much is everybody else earning? Are they on more than I am? Is it different? Is it the same? And it's one of the paradoxes, I think, about constellations is that organizational constellations can become all the more complex, actually, because they've got this order of money in there alongside all the other orders. Now, who's been in the business longest, who's the most expert, who's the highest in this pecking order, who's the most senior in terms of kind of respect that they're given, and so on. But money is kind of the lifeblood of organization. So it's not a trivial matter in an organization. And in organizational constellations, it's probably a stretch to make this analogy, but it's kind of literally the lifeblood, and it's as vital to an organization as blood and life are to families. And so we have to respect it in a even kind of profounder way, perhaps, than we do in family constellations. It's that without which an organization doesn't really function at all.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And as you were talking, I was thinking, and I'm curious about what the impact has been on particular organizations of actually paying women less for a male equivalent job.
Mm.
That has created an imbalance of exchange, and where that perhaps shows up elsewhere in the system.
Yes, and what's so fascinating about that is that women will have been paid less, even less, 50 years ago than they are today. And the question from a constellations point of view, which is perhaps controversial, might have been how far the organization at the time was acting in good conscience in paying women less because it was obeying the precepts or prejudices of the society to which it belonged. In other words, the social rules more or less dictated that women were paid less than men. How far was the organization at ease with itself in doing so? How far was the conscience actually, unpricked by that?
And I'm interested, even activated by that.
Yeah.
It would be because I think it still remains at the organizational level, it's in harmony with its kind of connection to social values.
Mm.
But the deep levels of the systemic conscience, I would imagine, though this would have to be explored, that it's out of balance.
Yeah.
And it pays a price at a certain point.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. More broadly, actually, I mean, for constellations, but maybe we'll pick it up in another conversation. But the degree to which any system, by complying with the mores of its time, is kind of innocent in some way.
Well, innocent in terms of its belonging to society.
Yeah, exactly.
Not innocent under another lens.
Exactly. Yeah.
And of course, that applies, to a lot of things that have happened culturally that have been exploitative.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it is interesting in an organizational setting when we deal with money, because money isn't, often it's a source of embarrassment in social life and in personal life and in family life, even between couples. But of course, in the business, it's not a source of embarrassment, but only at the organizational level. At the salary level, it still is, because you're still dealing with individual differences.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows the organization is there to make money. The amount of money is generally widely known, but person to person, those differences are often veiled and not known.
And it's interesting because one imagines how it is this point that somehow money is connected to ideas of value of different individuals in the organization. And we know that that connects often at an individual level to people who might come to our constellation workshops who feel very ashamed, perhaps, that they don't earn as much as they believe they should, or so there's a sense of somehow money then entering, a realm of personal identity.
Yeah. I mean, one of the precepts in organizational constellations around money is, and it can be tested and challenged, by the way, is that if you have a young person who's very gifted, it's better to pay them more than promote them, because promoting them is seen as more of a disturbance, or rather a disturbance of a more important order than that of money per se.
Yes.
So that in other words, there might be an order within the orders. So money is less important actually than seniority.
Yes. And that's interesting in terms of hierarchy, doesn't it? Because we see that in families too, where a child might be parentified or tucked under one of the parents' arms as their special one who fulfills an emotional need for them, and how unbalancing that is to a system.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I'm conscious of time, Nicola, so we should wrap up in a second. But perhaps one thought, a kind of constellations-y thought, we could have, going back to your original thought of money. If money's a wrapper, so say money is a wrapper for safety. In a constellation, then we could put up a representative for money, but also for safety. And then we could find where else in the system safety might be derived other than from money. And often safety actually represents an individual in the system with whom a connection has got broken in some way. And actually that's the thing to work on. And maybe for the constellators out there to kind of to remember that, to put in that for which money stands and work with that. Because if we can access that, then we assuage the fear which is presenting as a money fear.
Yes, and then because often money itself appears quite benign.
Yeah.
But it is that to which it's connected to.
Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful thought to stop on, Robert. I just want to say to everyone who's been listening, watching, please like, subscribe, and share. That helps to keep us motivated. And if you'd like to get in touch with Robert, you can find him at robertrowlandsmith.com. He's got masses to offer. And you can find myself, Nicola Dunn, at NICOLADUNNConstellations.com. We hope you'll watch again, and we look forward to discussing another topic.